Thanks to those who joined us today. I'm Taryn Jones, part of the developer marketing team here at Kong, and I want to welcome you to today's online meetup. We're going to be talking about controlling your Kong gateway with decK and CI/CD. And presenting today, we have our Director of Developer Relations, Micheal Heap. At the end of Michael's presentation, we'll open it up for Q&A and discussion. You will be able to unmute yourself and turn on your video if you'd like, but you're also welcome to just post your questions in the chat at the bottom of your screen, and we'll make sure and get to those. So with that, I'll go ahead and pass it over to Michael to kick us off. Thanks, Michael.
Thank you, Taryn. Welcome, everyone. Good morning, afternoon, or evening, depending on wherever you may be joining us from. It's getting a little bit dark over here in England, but I'm really looking forward to our time together this evening. Today, we're going to talk about configuring your Kong gateway using decK, which is Kong's declarative configuration tool. You might be wondering why you'd actually want to do this. After all, you've been using the API or the UI to configure your services, routes, plugins, and that's worked just fine in the past. But how many times have you heard this? What do you mean production's down? It was only a config change. It's easily done, and it's not just small companies. Some of you may have seen that Facebook dropped off the face of the earth the other week. That was just a config change. Hi, I'm Michael. I'm the Director of Developer Relations at Kong. I've been here since April this year, but my background is in engineering, including some time as an SRE. A few years ago, I wrote a book on configuration change management using Ansible from Red Hat. And despite that, I've still broken production with a configuration change recently, like the last 4 weeks or so. Today, we're going to take a look at how decK and GitHub Actions can save you from breaking production. We'll introduce decK, use it to back up our gateway instance configuration, make a change to that config file, and then apply that back to our gateway using decK, first manually and then through a GitHub Actions workflow. And then once that's done, we'll get on to some of the more advanced stuff, things like manual approvals for deploying to production, and how to manage distributed service configuration. And finally, how to go from 0 to running gateway in under 3 minutes using declarative configuration. It should take us about 20 minutes. Are you ready? All right. Let's start by introducing decK, which is a configuration management and drift detection tool for Kong. Well, that's a bit of a mouthful. So what does it actually mean? Well, decK can both export and import your service configuration, providing backups and a way to see your state as a text file. It can run a diff between your proposed configuration and your actual config. It can validate a declarative configuration file, and it can automate distributed configuration changes in a CI/CD platform. It's also important to note that decK is 100% open source. It uses the same APIs that are available to everyone. You can see its source code on GitHub. It's written in Go. That also means that you can contribute. If you have any issues or feature requests, we'd love to hear them. And if you write Go yourself and want to contribute, we'd love to help you on your journey. You can learn more at github.com/kong/decK. Now, it is possible to start from scratch with decK, but I'm guessing that most of you already have a running gateway instance somewhere. So let's set up a new instance with a single service and a single plugin, just so that we have a shared starting point. It won't be a complex one, just single root, single plugin. So I'm going to configure a service that points at a demo that we built for Kong Summit that ran 2 weeks ago. And I'm going to use the Kong Manager UI. So let's swap over to the browser and load up the Kong Manager UI, which is behind the firewall. So let me just fix that. Edit inbound rules. So you don't want to be exposing your Kong manager admin port to the whole internet, which is why I've got it behind the firewall. So I'm just going to add a quick rule to open it up to the entire internet for demo purposes only, just so we can see what's going on. So let's save that. And then try again. Here we are. Now it says here Kong is running in free mode. That's true. And this is important to note because it means that you can use it too. You don't have to have an enterprise license to use Kong Manager. It's not in the open source version, but it is in the free version. So if the important thing to you is that Kong is free, not Kong is open source, you can get this for free and try it out. It's really quite nice. So let's go in. And it won't let me create a new workspace. Live demos, hey, give me a second. I am going to apply a license just to get this working very quickly. 8001. And then, so you can't see this, I'm doing it just off to the side of the screen. Because I don't want you all to steal my license data. There we are, that's what I was looking for. So now I can go in and create that service that I was talking about. So the service name will be Summit Demo. And it's running on summitdemo.com. We want to add a single root. We'll call it sessions because what this API does is it returns the sessions that were happening at Summit. So it's a get request to /sessions, and we don't want to strip the path. And let's just check that that works. So if I go back here, actually, I need to grab the URL just quickly. And go back, port 8000, no root matched. If I call sessions, we get all of this session data from the API. That shows that our upstream is working as intended. Now, if I go ahead, let's add the rate limiting plugin. So we want to limit by IP address. So use the local policy and give them 3 requests per minute and create that. If I go back here, 1, 2, 3, rate limit exceeded. Excellent. So now we've got a known starting point. And I'm going to show you how to use decK to make a backup. So if I run decK dump, decK will download and serialize the configuration file to a file named kong.yaml. So if I go ahead and run decK dump, I can now see that we have kong.yaml. If I open that up in my editor and make that a little bit bigger, we can see all the things that we just configured in the UI, the hosts, the name, the rate limiting plugin. I'm just going to slim this down a little bit because we don't need all of these values. And we don't need the Redis host to password because we're using the local policy. And we only want it to apply to HTTP. We've got our root, it's a get, its name is sessions, the path is /sessions, and strip path is set to false. This is everything that we just configured. At this point, this is an awesome backup for our API gateway configuration. If I go back into this and say, actually, I want to delete that, Oh, I need to delete the routes first. And then delete the service. Like all of that configuration is now lost. But bringing it back is as easy as running decK sync. And we can see it created a service, a route, and a plugin. If I go back and refresh, everything is back. Now, usually when I run decK dump or decK sync, I'd have to specify the admin API address too. But in order to simplify things for this demo, I've added the conf address to my decK configuration file, which lives at .deck.yaml in your home folder. And that's what it looks like. The alternative would be to run decK dump conf address and then the URL. But I don't want to have to do that every time, so I've added it to my decK config file. So we had a service definition with an upstream and a plugin configuration. So we ran decK dump to download the config and decK sync to push it back up. But let's make a change to the rate limiting. Imagine that we deployed it with 3 minutes and decided that's too low. Instead, we want that to be 10. So we can change it to 10 in our configuration file, jump back and run decK sync. And this time we can see that one thing was updated because our service already existed, our routes already existed, and it's just the plugin config that's been updated. So if I click in to our service and into our route, oh, not into the route, into the plugin, edit plugin, we can see that that config.minute value is now 10. We didn't use the API, well, we did indirectly through decK, but we didn't use the UI. We're now starting to manage our gateway's configuration in declarative config. Now, being able to manage that config declaratively is great, but now you're the only person that can make changes. And unless you're editing that config file on your machine, there's no guarantees that you have the most recent configuration. And this is where using decK with CI/CD comes in, because we can treat a GitHub repo as our source of truth for the gateway configuration. So let's go ahead and do that. github.com mheap decK CI/CD. So I've got this repo here. It's currently empty. And this is what I'm going to be using as the source of truth. So if I jump back to my terminal, I'm going to add, there we are. I've got this folder and I'm just going to copy conf.yaml into this folder. And add that. Initial commit and push that up. If I go back to the repo, conf.yaml is now there. And this is great. We've now got a shared source of truth, but people still need to pull it down to their local machines, make changes and commit back up. So let's add a GitHub action that applies the changes in that file every time we commit to main. So to do that, we create a new file in the GitHub workflows folder. I'll just call that push.yaml because that's the event that we're going to be triggering it on. We'll say on push, we need to run some jobs. We'll call it run decK, and it runs on Ubuntu latest. decK will run on Windows, Ubuntu, and Mac. But for this demo, I'm going to use the Ubuntu runner. I have some steps. And the first thing you've got to do is set up decK. So decK isn't pre-installed on the runners. Thankfully, Kong offers a GitHub action to set this up for you. So we'll just say uses Kong setup decK at v1 with decK version, and we use 1.8.0. At this point, the runner machine has decK installed, which means our next step is run decK. So we run decK sync, and we've got to pass in the Kong address this time because we don't have that config file that we have on our local machine on GitHub Actions. So I'm going to jump back across here and just get that address. There it is. And that should be enough to apply on push. So there's a new folder. Add workflow and push that up. Now if we go back to the browser, we can see it's there. It's not red, which is a good start. But it is going to go red because I forgot a step.
Michael, while we have just a moment here, Mert has a question. Should have we multiple repositories for multiple applications? I imagine each application has different config files.
It's a very good question, and I will cover something about that in just a little while.
Excellent, thank you.
So I've set up decK and I wanted to run decK. But I realized I haven't actually checked out the files in the repo, which means that when decK sync runs, it won't be able to find kong.yaml. So just name checkout, and I need to use actions checkout at v2 and push that up. And then we'll go back to the browser, see that it failed. Oh, we can't see the logs because I'm not signed in. If you give me a second, I will sign in on this browser. So I'm using a special presentation browser so that we don't have my entire history in here. And I forgot to log into GitHub. So let me just do that now. Okay, I'm logged in, which means I should now be able to refresh. There we are, we can see the logs now. Say, oh, unknown shorthand flag. I've also missed a dash on Kong address. So we go back in again. You have to apologize for my terrible commit messages. And let's watch it run this time. Here we are. So check out, and then it ran decK. And if I go back, nothing should have happened because it's exactly the same config file. Yep, there it is, still 10 minutes. If I go back to the code and edit that config file and say, actually, we went from 3 to 10, that was a bit too much. Let's give them five minutes. Change rate limit to 5 minutes for session and push that up and go back to actions again. Should just take a second or two. That all ran fine. We can see that we got rid of minutes 10 and added minute 5. One thing was updated. And if I go back and refresh here, config.minute is now 5. And now we've got that single source of truth on GitHub. And not only that, we've got a record of when things changed, and who changed it. Like configuration changes are no longer invisible. We've got that history in GitHub. So we're halfway through. We've introduced decK, configured a new instance. We've used decK dump and decK sync, and we applied changes through GitHub Actions. So now we should get onto the more complex usage. Things like reviewing changes, because perhaps you don't want configuration changes applying directly to production. After all, that's no safer than people making changes on their local machine. So we're going to add an approval step to our actions workflow that uses decK diff to show what would change. And to do this, we need to create a GitHub environment. You can call it whatever you want. I'm going to call this one production. And I'm going to configure it that it requires review. And I'm going to say that I have to approve anything that goes to production. That's saved, which means we can go back to our workflow. And the way that we're going to set this up is we're actually going to run 2 jobs. I'm going to run decK diff. And what decK diff do is it will show you the output of what was created, deleted, changed without actually doing anything. And then we've got run decK, which needs decK diff. So we're adding some ordering here. So this decK diff job will run before run decK. And also this depends on the environment, the production environment. And it's environment, not env. If I push that up, and then go back to the browser, we can see now that there's 2 jobs. We've got decK diff, which is new, and run decK, which is what we had before, but that now is gated on that production environment. So if I click into decK diff, we can see the changes that were going to be made. But if I click into run decK, it says it needs approval to start deploying the changes. And I can review that. Want to go to production? Yes. Looks good to me. Approve and deploy. So now we've got that governance step. Not only are people not making changes on through the UI, through the API, it's going into GitHub, but they can't just make changes themselves. It's now got to go through that approval step from someone to say, yes, this is okay to go to production. Now, we've been working with a small configuration file so far, but it's unlikely to be this straightforward. Let's take a look at a configuration file that's a little bit more representative of the real world. So let's close those down. So here's a config file with, I can't even remember how many services. 1, 2, 3, 4. 5, 6 services. There are only 6 services in here, and they're not even big. Some of the services don't even have roots or plugins. But with 6, we're already at 250 files. And it's easy for these configuration files to get to 1,000, 2,000, 5,000 files long, 5,000 lines long. It gets unmanageable, and this is still a small configuration file. And to help with this, decK supports distributed configuration, where you can manage each service as its own file, and decK will merge them all together when applying changes. So this is where we get back to Mert's question about should we have these configurations in different repos. If you're using a single configuration file, then you have to have it all in one repo. But if you're using distributed configuration, which is what I'm about to show you, you can have them in individual repos and then build them all in your CI/CD platform into a single thing to send off. So imagine that we've got the sessions team. And this is just what we had before. Get sessions, plugin config. But we also have this products endpoint. And what products gives you. Let me show you, actually. Curl 8,000. That won't work because I don't have anything created yet. That's fine. Let's go ahead and apply this distributed configuration. I'll show you how to do that. Then I'll show you what the endpoint returns. So the way that it works with decK is you run decK sync, and by default, it will just look for cong.yaml. But if you pass in the -s flag, you can pass in multiple files. If I run that, I should be able to, call that /products endpoint. And we can see Kong has the gateway, it has Insomnia, it has developer portal, some of which are open source, some of which are enterprise. And if I go back to the UI, I can see multiple services now, and there's the product root with the rate limiting plugin. And finally, I want to show you just how easy it is to get started with Kong. So what I'm going to do is provision a brand new EC2 instance in AWS using Pulumi, install Kong with Ansible, and then configure those services with decK. And it's going to take less than 4 minutes. So Pulumi up stack community. So Pulumi is now going ahead and it's creating me an AWS. It will be if I could actually press up on my keyboard. It's going to create us a security group and an EC2 instance. And let me show you what that looks like in code whilst that's running. So Pulumi is an infrastructure as code tool. If you've ever used Terraform or something like that, it might feel familiar. Pulumi is code rather than declarative config, and I've written this one in TypeScript, but they offer lots of different languages. So we're going to create an Ubuntu instance. So we need to get the AMI ID. We're going to create a new security group. Ports 8,000 for hosting the proxy and 8,001 to be able to run decK against it. Again, you wouldn't have this publicly accessible on the internet usually, but for this demo, I'm just going to do it for ease of use. We want to create a new EC2 instance, put it in the security group that we just created, and it's accessible using the key name of keyname, which is mheap gateway testing, which is just a key that I've got on my EC2 instance, on my AWS account, sorry. Now, if I jump back to the console, that's created. So we've got an EC2 instance. Next thing is to install Kong. Let's say I'm going to use Ansible for that. So I just need to update the host name. Ansible playbook, point it to that inventory file, ask vault, password, and playbook.yaml. And I'll show you what this is doing. So Ansible is a YAML-based configuration management system. We've just got a set of tasks that it runs in order. It adds the Kong apt repo because we're using Ubuntu. It installs the required packages, Python 3 and ACL for Ansible, and then Postgres and Kong Enterprise Edition. We create a Postgres database, create the Kong user, copy the config file, which is just here. So minimal one, listen on all ports, on all IP addresses, all interfaces. We're using Postgres. My password is new password. And then we want to run migrations. So Kong migrations bootstrap, and then restart Kong. Those are all the steps you need to deploy Kong. So add the repo, install the package, create the database, create the user, copy the config file, run migrations, and then restart Kong. And whilst I was showing you that, Ansible did all of those jobs. So now if I go back to the browser and call port 8000, we can see that Kong is running, but no root matched with those values. If I go to /sessions, we get exactly the same thing. So we've got just one thing left to do, which is take that and decK CI/CD, run decK sync Kong address, and it's HTTP port 8001. And now if I go back and refresh, we get all of our session information. Now this machine didn't exist less than 5 minutes ago. We've just provisioned a new machine, provisioned Kong install, and restored all of our service root plugin configuration using decK. And if I just refresh a few times, rate limit exceeded, just what we were expecting. One last thing, decK also works with Kong Connect, or hosted control plane solution. All the demos we've seen today use the on-prem gateway, but decK can run decK Connect Sync 2 to manage services within Connect. In fact, if you want to migrate from on-prem to Connect, that can be done in just 60 seconds using decK, which is pretty awesome. At least I think so. That takes us to the end of the demo. Thanks for your attention, and I am here for questions if you have any.
So, hey, this is Siddharth here. So I have a quick question. So the decK that the address that you provide from a decK perspective, is that the admin instance, admin port and the host?
It is, yes.
Okay. So whatever you go and deploy, it would be there from an admin perspective. But suppose I deploy everything through Kubernetes using the KIC ingress controller, I wouldn't be able to view that from a decK perspective, right? Is that a right statement?
It is. If you've deployed using the ingress controller, you probably wouldn't use declarative config to configure things. Mm-hmm. Instead, you will be using CIDs. So your CIDs ideally would also be managed through a GitOps type workflow. So you'd be committing them to GitHub, and then your CI/CD platform would be running kubectl apply on those CIDs.
Yeah. Okay. Sure. That helps. Thank you.
And looks like we had a couple of questions in the chat. Some of these kind of came in towards the middle, so not sure. Raghunath, did you get your answer to that question? He has, yeah, go ahead.
It's the same question, Taran. I think that's answered now.
Yeah. And another one from Mert. Did I integrate GitHub in AWS earlier? No, I didn't. I did something very naughty and opened up my admin port to the entire world. And that's how GitHub could reach my cloud provider. I just gave it the address and anyone could have called that admin port. If I were to do this properly, I should be limiting it to the GitHub Actions runners IP addresses only, which you can get at api.github.com/meta. They return all their IP addresses there. Alternatively, you can add an SSH step to your workflow so that your GitHub action actually logs into your Kong machine and then uses the admin API locally on localhost rather than connecting to it over the internet, which is a much more secure way to do things. But it would have made this demo a little bit too complicated. And I was just really trying to show off the decK utility.
And the Kong manager that you showed, right? So can that be? I mean, is it a free version? Can we use like open source, or should we have a license for that?
Nope. So decK is entirely open source. It works with Kong open source. It works with Kong free. It works with Kong Connect. It works with all of our gateway runtimes. And decK itself is fully open source. It's available at github.com/Kong/decK.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Taryn.
All right, any other questions? Can be general questions as well. If you have something unrelated, perhaps Michael can ask.
Happy to answer anything Kong related, not just about decK. All right. In which case, thank you for your attention, everyone. And we will hopefully see you next month.
Yes, our next call is on November 9th, and we hope to see you there. Thank you, Michael. Have a good day, everyone.
Thank you, team. That was helpful. Thank you.
Cheers. Bye.
Thank you.